On September 30th, 2024, a group of engineers arrived in Namu, an abandoned fishing village on the remote coast of British Columbia. Their task was to inspect the dilapidated docks and empty buildings of the old fish canning complex. However, while flying over the area, a drone detected a thin wisp of smoke rising from the building, which had been considered uninhabited for decades. On the wet ground near the shore, the workers noticed fresh, barefoot footprints. They wound their way between rusty barrels and ended at the door of a dark workshop. When the ship's captain called out to whoever was inside, an exhausted woman with long, tangled hair emerged from the building. She was limping, frightened by the sound of the engine, and clutching a roughly carved wooden doll to her chest. The woman could not explain where she had come from or how long she had been in that place. She repeated only a few incomprehensible words. Red hall, 3 rings, cold room, and the name Malcolm. And when the captain approached, she retreated into the darkness and asked him not to wake Sophie. It wasn't until 18 hours later at the medical station that she revealed her real name, Laura Dawson. 7 years ago, 29-year-old Laura disappeared from a cruise ship in the middle of the cold waters of the Queen Charlotte Strait. Search planes, boats, and shore teams found neither her body nor her life jacket. Investigators concluded that she had fallen overboard, and 2 years later, Laura was officially declared dead. Now she stood hundreds of miles from the site of her disappearance, alive, but convinced that her 5-year-old daughter had been inside a wooden doll all this time. What happened to Laura that night? Who prevented her from returning home? And why, after 7 years of isolation, was she most afraid not of people, but of the sound of a red fishing boat's engine? In August 2017, 29-year-old Laura Dawson was living in Seattle with her husband, Daniel, and their 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. She worked as a pediatric occupational therapist. Her colleagues described her as calm and responsible. Since her daughter was born, Laura had never traveled alone. On the eve of her 30th birthday, her younger sister Rebecca suggested a 9-day cruise along the coast of British Columbia and Alaska. Daniel supported the idea and took time off work to stay with Sophie. Their daughter was fascinated by whales and asked her mother to take a photo of a humpback whale in the open sea herself. According to Daniel, before they left, Sophie asked her mom not to get too close to the water. Laura was a tentative swimmer, so she promised to wear a life jacket on the open decks. On the morning of August 19th, the sisters took a train from Seattle to Vancouver, and from there they made their way to the Canada Place terminal. Their ship, the Northern Empress, was an expedition cruise ship with a capacity of 400 passengers. The route followed the Canadian coast, with stops in Ketchikan, Juneau, and Skagway. Laura and Rebecca were assigned to the same cabin on the 5th deck. The first few days passed without incident. Laura sent photos to her husband, spoke with her daughter via video call, and kept her family updated on the ship's location. Their last full conversation took place on the evening of August 21st. At 10:30 p.m., Laura called home. Due to increasing motion, the video feed cut out several times. According to Daniel, Laura told Sophie that the next morning the ship would be passing through an area where whales are often sighted, and she promised to go up on deck before dawn. The conversation lasted about 7 minutes. Daniel didn't notice anything unusual in his wife's voice. Around 11 p.m., Rebecca took her seasickness medication and went to bed. She later told investigators that Laura was feeling nauseous, so her sister decided to step out for some fresh air for a short while. She put on a waterproof jacket and grabbed an inflatable life jacket near the exit to the aft deck. At 11:18 p.m., a camera captured Laura in the fifth deck corridor. Her life jacket was already fastened. Due to the ship's motion, she was moving slowly and holding onto the wall with one hand. 4 minutes later, another camera captured the woman walking past the closed restaurant and heading toward the aft observation deck. The last few yards of her route were not recorded. The camera near the lower aft section had been temporarily removed for ventilation maintenance. At 11:47 p.m., a sensor registered the opening of the door leading to the lower deck. During rough seas, it was supposed to remain closed. An alert indicating that the door had remained open for 11 minutes was sent to the engineering console, but the mechanic on duty decided the sensor was malfunctioning. Rebecca woke up around midnight. Her sister's bed was empty. 20 minutes later, she tried to call Laura, but her cell phone was in the cabin next to her passport, wallet, and medication. At 00:27, Rebecca contacted the administrator on duty. Security checked the ship and announced Laura's name several times over the intercom. There was no response. After reviewing the security footage, the captain was informed that the passenger had entered the aft section, but her return had not been recorded. At 00:46, a possible person overboard was reported. The cruise ship slowed down, turned around, and headed back. Lighted buoys were dropped into the water. Nearby vessels joined the search, and Canadian rescue services took charge of coordination. The probable point of entry was in the southern part of the Queen Charlotte Strait. It was raining that night, the waves were growing, and visibility was reduced to a few hundred yards. Airplanes scanned the water with thermal imaging cameras, while boats searched coves and possible drift paths. The search lasted 3 days. Neither a body, nor clothing, nor a life jacket was found. An inspection of the stern deck revealed wear on the locking pin of the safety gate. There were no signs of a struggle, no foreign fingerprints, and no evidence of intentional damage. The leading theory was that she had accidentally fallen during a sharp roll of the ship. 2 years later, Laura was officially declared deceased as a result of a maritime accident. For her family, the dark stern deck of the Northern Empress remained her last trace. However, the radar archive from that night preserved one more entry, a vessel without an automatic identification signal that passed approximately 1 nautical mile from the probable site of the fall. 7 years have passed. On the morning of September 30th, 2024, a workboat belonging to North Coast Stracturel and Marine entered Namu Harbor on the coast of British Columbia. Engineers had arrived to inspect the old docks and buildings of the former fish canning complex. Due to the dilapidated condition of the structures, they launched a drone before disembarking. During the flight, the operator noticed a thin wisp of smoke rising above the former residential building. Part of the roof had collapsed, the windows were boarded up, and the walkway to the pier had disappeared many years ago. On the damp ground near the shore, they saw fresh, barefoot footprints. The tracks led between rusty barrels and ended in front of the door to an old workshop. According to the captain, he introduced himself several times and asked the person inside to come out. At first, there was no response.
Then a woman appeared in the dark doorway.
She was wearing an oversized work jacket, faded work pants, and homemade shoes made from pieces of rubber and rope. Her tangled hair reached almost to her waist. The woman was exhausted. She limped and flinched every time the sound of an engine drifted in from the harbor. In both hands, she held a wooden doll about 10.5 inches tall. The figure had been roughly carved from light-colored wood. One leg was shorter, the face was marked by several deep lines, and the torso was wrapped in a strip of faded yellow fabric. The initial report noted that when the captain took a step forward, the woman stepped back and asked him not to start the red boat, because Sophie sleeps when the water is calm. She could not explain who Sophie was, where she had come from, or how long she had been in Namu. When asked about other people, she responded in fragments, repeating the words Malcolm, 3 rings, red hull, and don't open the cold room.
The engineers did not force their way in. They left water, cookies, and a thermal blanket at the entrance, then retreated to the dock. The captain contacted shore-based services via a satellite phone. Upon the rescuers' arrival, the woman refused to board the vessel while the engine was running. The engine was shut off, and an inflatable boat was lowered to the shore. She agreed to get into it, only on the condition that the wooden figurine remain in her hands. At the Bella Bella Medical Clinic, doctors diagnosed severe exhaustion, anemia, dehydration, a malunited ankle fracture, and old scars on her wrists. They found no signs of a recent attack, but her condition indicated a prolonged period of living without proper nutrition or medical care. Every attempt to examine the doll caused her to panic. The medical staff cleaned the doll's exterior and allowed the patient to keep it with her. 18 hours later, the woman gave her name for the first time. According to the police officer on duty, she quietly said, "Laura Dawson, Seattle. Sophie is 5 years old." A check of the missing persons database revealed a match with a case of a passenger who had gone missing from a cruise ship in August 2017. Her height, an old surgical scar, and damage to her front tooth all matched. For definitive identification, Rebecca's dental records and a DNA sample were requested. 2 days later, the identity was confirmed. Laura Dawson was 36 years old. Daniel was informed of the discovery in person. Sophie, who had just turned 12, initially thought there must be a mistake. For 7 years, she had known her mother only through photographs and stories from relatives. Their first meeting took place at a Vancouver medical center through a protective glass partition.
According to the psychologist, Laura stared at the girl for a long time, then shifted her gaze to a doll and whispered that Sophie was small, but this child was too tall. She didn't recognize Daniel right away and wouldn't let him come closer. When they turned off the fan, which sounded like a ship's engine, Laura calmed down a little. Psychiatrists speculated that her attachment to the wooden figurine had developed under conditions of prolonged isolation and severe psychological trauma. Laura understood that she was holding a wooden object, but she treated it as if it were a living child who needed to be fed, covered, and protected. On the 3rd day, she uttered a phrase that caused investigators to stop treating the case as a routine disappearance at sea. According to the interview transcript, Laura said she hadn't swum all the way to the island. She had been pulled from the water. before the rescuers' lights appeared. Investigators didn't know exactly who had found her that night. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you think happened to Laura after she fell overboard. This will help YouTube's algorithms promote the video and show it to more people.
The first substantive conversations with Laura began only a few weeks after her hospitalization. The doctors prohibited lengthy interrogations. Attempts to reconstruct several years at once caused disorientation, panic attacks, and a loss of connection with the present. Therefore, the investigators worked in short sessions, using nautical charts, photographs of the coastline, models of fishing vessels, and recordings of engine sounds. Laura couldn't always name a specific location, but she confidently recognized the shapes of the islands, the layout of the doors, and the distinctive sound of the old diesel engine. Gradually, from scattered fragments, they were able to reconstruct the night of her disappearance. According to Laura, she went out onto the lower aft deck because she was feeling very nauseous. She deliberately put on the yellow life jacket, remembering the promise she had made to her daughter.
When the cruise ship tilted sharply, she lost her balance, hit her shoulder against the safety gate, and fell into the water. The worn latch popped out of its slot, and the gate swung open outward. The life jacket inflated automatically and kept her afloat. Laura watched the ship's lights recede and tried to shout, but the wind carried her voice off to the side. Eventually, the ship began to turn around. Beams of searchlight appeared through the rain, but the waves kept obscuring her view. She estimated that she had been in the water for less than 1 hour. Then a low-slung fishing boat with a dark red hull and a green wheelhouse appeared nearby. 2 men hauled her aboard using a boat hook and a rope loop. Later, Laura identified the 3 crew members. The boat was captained by Malcolm Rask, who was 47 years old at the time. With him were his younger brother, Caleb Rask, and a hired crew member, Owen Pike. The vessel was named the Sea Wren. According to Laura's account, the men removed her wet jacket, gave her a blanket, and provided her with hot water. For the first few minutes, she was certain she had been rescued. Malcolm said he would contact the Coast Guard, but they never turned on the radio. On deck, Laura noticed sealed containers, diving equipment, and plastic containers without the required labeling. There was an additional refrigerated compartment under the deck. The investigation later determined that the crew had been illegally fishing for sea cucumbers, halibut, and protected species of sea bass, and had been selling the catch through middlemen using forged documents. The boat's automatic identification transmitter was not working. The registration name on board was partially covered by a removable panel. Malcolm had forged vessel documents and a valid warrant, so an encounter with the police would have meant the confiscation of the vessel, the loss of the cargo, and arrest. Laura couldn't repeat the crew's conversation word for word, but from the gist of what she heard, she understood. Caleb was suggesting they drop her off at Bella Bella, while Owen insisted on making an anonymous report to the rescue services. Malcolm decided to get rid of the illegal cargo first. At dawn, the Sea Wren did not head for the nearest port. The boat entered the Quaxua Channel, rounded Calvert Island, and set course for Hunter Island. A few hours later, it passed through the narrow entrance to Kildit Inlet and stopped near a small industrial camp. On the shore stood a wooden dock, a generator shed, a smokehouse, a warehouse, and 2 residential buildings. The complex was called Blackturn Station. Malcolm stated that Laura would spend only 1 night there. Her life jacket, wet clothes, and all items that could be used to identify her were taken from her. Then they locked her in a former net repair workshop.
The next day, the men unloaded the containers and began preparing the boat for another trip. Laura demanded that they take her to the police, gave her husband's name, and warned that the search had already begun. According to her testimony, an argument broke out among the crew members. Owen again suggested contacting the authorities. Malcolm replied that Laura had seen the hidden compartment, remembered their faces, and would be able to lead the police to the base. By that point, she had already been held for over 1 day. Releasing her would mean admitting not only to illegal fishing, but also to kidnapping. Malcolm called his decision a temporary measure to keep Laura at the camp until the end of the season, and then drop her off somewhere where she wouldn't be able to identify the base's location. Days passed, but the boat did not return her to civilization. Laura memorized the daily routine, the routes, the customers' voices, and the conversations about deliveries. To Malcolm, she was no longer just a passenger he had rescued by chance. She had become a witness who could only be controlled through complete isolation. And then, a lock appeared on the workshop door, one that hadn't been there before.
Black Turn Station was located deep within a sheltered cove on Hunter Island. The camp was shielded from the sea route by cliffs and forest. There were no roads, no permanent communications, and no electrical grid. A generator ran for a few hours a day, and rainwater was collected in tanks. Food, fuel, and equipment were delivered by the boat Sea Wren. Officially, the buildings were considered abandoned, but Malcolm Rusk used them as a hidden base for illegal fishing. According to Laura's testimony, she was locked up at night in a former workshop. During the day, she was forced to clean fish, wash containers, prepare food, and repair equipment. When the men went out to sea, the door was locked from the outside. The windows were boarded up, and the emergency exit was secured with a chain. For the first few months, Laura kept track of time. She made notches on a wooden frame and repeated aloud her home address, Daniel's phone number, Sophie's birthday, and the names of her relatives. Malcolm disrupted this system. He took away her watches, changed the calendars, and gave her false dates. Sometimes he convinced Laura that the search had been called off. Other times he claimed that Daniel had been accused of his wife's disappearance and that Sophie had been given to another family. In the spring of 2018, Laura made her first serious attempt to escape. While the men were unloading fuel, she hid in an aluminum boat and tried to leave the cove at night. Laura didn't know the currents and could barely operate the motor. A few miles from the camp, the boat ran aground on rocks during low tide. Caleb found her about 6 hours later. On the way back, Laura injured her ankle. She received no medical attention. The bone healed improperly, and she has limped ever since. After that, Malcolm removed the spark plugs from the boats and locked up the fuel. At the end of 2018, Laura heard a report on the ship's radio marking the anniversary of her disappearance. It mentioned Daniel and 6-year-old Sophie. That was how Laura first learned that her daughter was alive. A few days later, in the generator room, Laura found a piece of yellow fabric from her life jacket. Malcolm had been using the scraps as rags. She hid the strip under her clothes, and that winter she began carving a small figurine from a fragment of a cedar plank. Her tool was a sharpened piece of metal container. Laura carved out arms, short legs, and a few lines for a face, then wrapped the torso in the yellow fabric. She named the figurine Sophie. At first, the doll helped her keep her memories alive. Laura would tell her about home, repeat her daughter's age, and reenact evening rituals. She would lay her down beside her, cover her with fabric, and whisper familiar fairy tales. Prolonged isolation, malnutrition, insomnia, and threats gradually altered her perception. During certain episodes, Laura treated the doll as if it were a living child. She shared her food with it, protected it from the cold, and was afraid to leave it alone. Malcolm quickly understood the doll's significance. According to Laura, he threatened to burn it if the captive refused to work or tried to escape again. This kind of pressure proved more effective than physical punishment. However, the doll had another purpose. During moments of lucidity, Laura hollowed out a small cavity in the doll's torso. There she hid a metal tag from the container, part of a sticker from the boat, a scrap of a fuel receipt, and a small key to a locker in the wheelhouse.
She called these items Sophie's memories. In 2019, Owen Pike began to clash with Malcolm. He brought Laura extra food and once promised to notify the police. After another trip out to sea, Owen did not return to camp. In the years that followed, her isolation intensified. Maritime traffic dwindled, and Malcolm convinced Laura that neighboring crews were working against him. Caleb sometimes brought her medicine and books, but he didn't dare to free her. Over the years of silence, he himself became an accomplice. By the year 2023, the camp had begun to fall into disrepair. Storms had damaged the dock, the roof was leaking, and the generator frequently broke down. At the same time, Laura had learned to start the motor, distinguish navigation lights, and determine the tide by the water level near the pilings. Laura feigned submission. She talked to her doll, asked permission for every action, and didn't look in the direction of the boats for too long.
Malcolm came to believe that her will had been broken. In the summer of 2024, a patrol plane flew over the island several times. Later, a drone appeared, surveying the coastline. Malcolm decided that the base might have been discovered and ordered the Sea Wren to be prepared for an urgent relocation. For the first time in 7 years, Laura knew the exact time when all the boats would be left unattended.
While Laura was undergoing treatment, the British Columbia Police and Fisheries Enforcement officers began verifying her testimony. Investigators needed to determine whether the people, the boat, and the remote camp she described actually existed, or whether these images were the result of long-term trauma. The first problem was a wooden doll. Laura would not allow it to be taken away, even for a few minutes. Doctors warned that forcibly removing it could worsen the patient's condition and destroy the only sense of security she had retained after her isolation. It was only after several weeks that Laura agreed to an examination. Under the doctor's conditions, she remained in the room, observed every action the expert took, and could stop the procedure at any moment. The examination revealed that the doll's torso consisted of 2 parts. The seam was sealed with wood resin and a layer of fish oil. Inside were 4 objects. The first was an aluminum tag from an industrial container. Part of the serial number and the letters NRMS were still visible on the surface. The second was a fragment of an old sticker labeled Sea Wren. The third was a fuel receipt from Port Hardy, dated July 2019. On the back, 3 names had been scratched with a sharp object: Malcolm, Caleb, and Owen. The final find was a small brass key. The letters on the tag led investigators to the company North Rich Marine Services. Officially, it ceased operations in 2016, but its name continued to appear in documents related to the sale of used fishing equipment for several more years. One of the company's former executives was Malcolm Rask. In the Fisheries Inspection Archives, they found photographs of the Sea Wren taken during a previous inspection. The vessel had a dark red hull, a green wheelhouse, and a distinctive metal patch near the stern.
During an identification procedure, Laurie was shown several similar boats. According to the report, she pointed to the Sea Wren without hesitation and specifically indicated the location of the patch. After that, investigators returned to the records of the 2017 search operation. The Northern Empress radar log did indeed show a small target that passed near Laura's presumed crash site approximately 40 minutes after her disappearance. The vessel then changed course and headed toward the Quaxua Channel. At the time of the initial investigation, the owner could not be identified. The Automatic Identification System, AIS, transmitter was turned off, and the radar signal disappeared after the vessel entered the coastal channels. The new data suggested that the unidentified vessel was, in fact, the Sea Wren. A separate investigation was conducted using satellite and aerial photographs of Hunter Island. In Kildit Inlet, a group of buildings was discovered that were officially considered abandoned. Images from different years showed that the roofs had been repaired periodically. Containers had appeared near the dock, and the vegetation around the generator house had been regularly cleared. Laura did not recognize the coastline from the air, but she correctly identified the locations of the warehouse, the residential building, and the long pier. She then drew a narrow cove, the generator room, and a separate room, which she called the cold room, on a blank sheet of paper. The experts also examined the brass key. Its shape matched that of industrial locks, installed on ship cabinets and small technical compartments. Investigators speculated that the key could have opened a storage compartment containing documents, supply logs, or other evidence. While the inspection was underway, Laura met her daughter for the first time without a protective screen. The medical staff asked Sophie not to touch her mother or try to take the doll. The girl sat across from her and placed a photograph taken a week before the cruise in front of her. According to the psychologist's notes, Laura spent a long time comparing the face of the 5-year-old child in the photo with the 12-year-old girl sitting before her. She said that Sophie couldn't possibly be that grown up. Her daughter replied that she was 5 years old when her mother disappeared. Laura pressed the doll to her chest and asked to end the meeting. However, before leaving, she called the girl by name for the first time. That same evening, she recalled another detail. Before their last move, Malcolm had mentioned a place beyond the Namu, near the old river warehouse, several times. This could explain how Laura ended up among the abandoned buildings of the fish canning complex. The body of evidence made it possible to obtain search warrants for Black Turn Station, the Sea Wren boat, and properties associated with Malcolm Rash. However, by the time the operation was being prepared,
No one could confirm that the camp was still empty. At dawn on October 12, 2024, a group of police officers and fisheries enforcement officers entered Kildit Inlet. They covered the last part of the route in small boats with their engines silenced so as not to alert the people on shore. The camp turned out to be empty. At the same time, evidence indicated that it had been abandoned only recently. Fuel was stored in the generator room, food was in the warehouse, and wet ropes remained near the dock. In one of the rooms, they found a bed, a metal ring in the floor, and a heavy chain. The door could only be locked from the outside. Hundreds of short notches remained on the workshop walls. Some were grouped in sets of 7, while others formed long vertical rows. Under a layer of paint, experts discovered words scratched in English. Daniel, Sophie, Seattle, 2017. Hair and biological traces belonging to Laura were found inside the building. A fragment of a yellow life jacket lay in the generator room. The serial number matched that of the equipment that had gone missing from the Northern Empress on the night of its crash. A brass key hidden inside a doll unlocked a cabinet in an old wheelhouse set up on the shore. Inside were supply logs, forged fishing permits, and records of cash transactions. Some of the documents covered the period from 2017 to 2024. The Sea Wren was discovered near Port Hardy. The old name on the hull had been painted over, and a new one had been painted on top of it. Malcolm Rask was in the workshop trying to remove the registration plates. He was detained before he could damage the vessel or destroy the documents. Caleb Rusk was found 2 days later. After being shown photographs of the camp, the results of the forensic examinations, and items from the doll, he agreed to testify.
It was based on his testimony that investigators reconstructed the circumstances of Laura's final escape. In September 2024, Malcolm decided to close Black Turn Station. They planned to transport the equipment to another location near Rivers Inlet and leave Laura in an isolated warehouse. By that time, she had been feigning complete submission for quite some time. She was allowed to move about the deck under supervision and was no longer bound. That night, the Sea Wren entered Fitzhugh Sound, towing a small aluminum boat. Near Namu Harbor, the engine overheated. Malcolm and Caleb went down to the engine room, leaving the deck unattended. According to Caleb's testimony, Laura took a wooden doll, an emergency canister, and a knife. She cut the tow rope, got into the boat, and started the motor. Her disappearance was noticed about 15 minutes later. Due to the malfunction, the Sea Wren could not turn around immediately.
After repairs, Malcolm began the pursuit but lost sight of the boat in the fog. Laura reached Namu before dawn. She hid the boat under a ruined pier and entered one of the old buildings. There she found several cans of food and collected water during rainstorms. She spent 9 days in the abandoned settlement. Laura could hear the engines of ships, but she didn't go out. After 7 years of captivity, she was convinced that Malcolm controlled all the boats in the area. Only the unfamiliar silhouette of a workboat and the absence of the red hull prompted her to reveal herself to the engineers. Caleb admitted that at first, Laura had been held captive out of fear that their illegal fishing operations would be exposed. Later, the motive changed. Malcolm exploited her labor and increasingly sought total control. With each passing year, the potential punishment grew, so releasing her seemed more dangerous to him than continuing the crime. Owen Pike was found in Nanaimo. He corroborated the bulk of Caleb's testimony. In 2019, Owen left the crew but did not report the captive, fearing Malcolm and potential repercussions for himself. An old cell phone contained threatening messages and a photograph of the camp, in which a female figure was visible near the workshop. Malcolm denied the charges. He claimed that he had rescued Laura and that she had allegedly chosen to remain at the camp of her own free will due to a mental disorder. This version of events was contradicted by the external locks, the chain, the condition of the premises, medical reports, Owen's records, and Laura's years-long efforts to preserve evidence. The investigation found no evidence of a secret organization or a premeditated abduction. It all began with a decision to conceal illegal cargo, and continued with the silence of people, each of whom could have sought help. Now, it was up to the investigators to prove that 7 years of silence were not inaction, but rather conscious participation in a crime. A separate maritime investigation determined the exact cause of Laura Dawson's fall overboard. Following maintenance work, the stern gate latch had been installed incorrectly. Due to corrosion, the pin did not fully engage in the slot. During a sharp list, Laura lost her balance, hit her shoulder against the railing, and the hatch swung open outward. The investigation found no evidence that anyone on the liner pushed her or planned her disappearance in advance. The fall was an accident. The crime began later, at the moment when the crew of the Sea Wren decided to hide the rescued woman instead of handing her over to the Coast Guard. Malcolm Rask was charged with kidnapping, prolonged unlawful detention, causing serious bodily harm, obstructing an investigation, and crimes related to illegal fishing. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. Caleb Rask and Owen Pike admitted their involvement and agreed to cooperate with the investigation.
The court took their testimony into account, but specifically emphasized that fear of Malcolm did not justify their years of silence. Both received lengthy prison sentences. After the trial concluded, the wooden doll was returned to Laura. Formally, the criminal portion of the case was closed. But for the Dawson family, that was when the most difficult phase began. Returning home could not be defined by a discharge date or a court ruling. Laura had to relearn how to be around people she had once trusted unconditionally. Her recovery was not a quick return to her former life. She couldn't stand closed doors, the smell of diesel fuel, the hum of the ventilation system, or being touched by unfamiliar men. In her sleep, Laura would hear the generator again and count the engine's beats, as if trying to determine when the boat would leave the cove. Doctors described her condition as a combination of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative symptoms, and episodes of psychosis caused by prolonged isolation. They did not take the doll away from her. The specialists believed that Laura first needed to regain a sense of security, and only then could she be helped to distinguish the image of the wooden Sophie from her real daughter. Daniel didn't demand that his wife come home right away. Everyone had changed over the past 7 years. He had learned to raise their child on his own. Sophie had grown up without a mother, and Laura was psychologically still stuck in August 2017. The first meetings lasted about 10 minutes. Sophie would sit at a distance, and read aloud the books her mother used to read to her before bed. During one meeting, the girl deliberately mispronounced a familiar line. According to the psychologist's notes, Laura automatically corrected her. This became their first shared memory that didn't have to be reconstructed from photographs, videos, or relatives' stories. A few months later, Laura was able to accept that the 12-year-old girl standing before her and the 5-year-old child from her memory were one and the same person. She still placed the doll beside her while she slept, but she stopped trying to feed it or cover it up against the cold. On the first anniversary of her rescue, Laura, along with Daniel and Sophie, went to the Vancouver waterfront. She didn't go near the water or look at the ships passing in the distance. The family stopped above the high tide line. According to Daniel, Sophie asked for permission to take a closer look at a wooden figurine. Laura held it with both hands for a long time, and then, for the first time, willingly handed it to her daughter. On the doll's back, Sophie noticed barely visible letters carved many years ago. The inscription was in English. Sophie Dawson, 5 years old, waiting at home. The doll wasn't a mystical object. It had become a way to preserve the memory of her child, a sense of time, and her own identity. On the island, Laura had gradually lost her sense of the date, her age, and the world around her. But as long as she continued to protect the wooden Sophie, a part of the mother who had promised to return home remained within her. Now the real Sophie was holding that figurine in her hands. Laura looked at her daughter in silence. Physically, she had already returned from the island. However, the doctors could not say how long it would take for the rest of her memory to return from that place, or whether she would ever again be able to hear the sound of a boat's motor without thinking that the workshop door was about to be locked.